and demonstrate some things about microphones and loudspeakers and the sort of general subject of microphones and loudspeakers. At some point it's fairly dim in here and you might want to come a little closer for parts because a lot of this stuff is kind of very tiny. I build a lot of electronic devices, mostly things that are sort of entirely in the box, pure electronics, where the electronics are doing the vibrating. There are electrical vibrations in the box, and I sort of let them out into the world as sound by way of loudspeakers. But as a sort of interesting entry point into electronics, I think loudspeakers and microphones hold a sort of an interesting gate-like quality, in as much as you've got natural vibrations in the world, those are the things you hear as sound, and you somehow are converting them into electrical vibrations and pushing them around in little boxes, changing characteristics of them, turning them on and off, making them larger and smaller, making them distorted or causing echoes or reverbs or filtering things in and out of them. But what's interesting is not just what happens inside the box, but what happens to the air eventually. Because we can't hear any of the electrical vibrations inside an electronic device until somehow we make the air vibrate. Right? This thing is an iPod, strangely enough. I own one of these things. And if you put it up to your ear, you can't hear what it's doing. Right? Although it is doing something, it's generating electrical signals. The only way I can hear it is if I somehow get it to push the air around. And we do that with loudspeakers. And when we want to take vibrations within the air or other suitable media and turn them into electrical signals, we do that with things like microphones and microphone-related devices. And there is a sort of general, this is sort of partially a science lecture, partially a sound and music kind of a thing. And there are a large category of kind of devices in the world of devices that change energy from one form to another, which is what we do when we use microphones and loudspeakers. We take energy that's vibrations in the physical world, we call mechanical vibrations, and we turn them into electrical signals. So that's a transfer of energy from one form to another, right? And we do that sort of thing all the time in our lives, and we sort of get used to it. But there are a lot of other devices that do very similar things, right? Like we take electrical energy and we turn it into a change in the temperature of the air, right? What an air conditioner does, or a refrigerator, right? Or we take light energy and we convert it into, we take electrical energy and we convert it into light, for instance, when we turn on our electrical bulbs. That's a form of energy transfer from one form to another, and science decides that there are different forms of energy, right? There's like the energy of a ball sitting on top of a cliff that's about to fall off. There's the energy of electrical vibrations. What other kind of energies are there? They're like magnetic energies, right? There are electrical energies, there are vibrational energies, there are energies of motion, and so on. An antenna on a radio serves a similar function. There are radio frequency energies radiating in the sky that we can't hear, but the antenna is a device that captures that information and helps to turn it into an electrical form that we can eventually hear with the aid of electronic stuff. The sort of general category for all these kinds of devices comes under the heading of what science calls transducers. The word transducer has two parts to it. Trans is the one sort of prefix that we're used to seeing all the time. It means like across or through or something like that. And ducer comes from the Latin word meaning to lead. So the word transducer means to lead across. And a transducer is a device that leads energy from one form into another form. And sometimes in the opposite direction as well. Microphones and loudspeakers are most of the time electroacoustic transducers, which is to say they take energy from an electrical form and turn it into an acoustic form, or they do the opposite. They take energy from an acoustic form and turn it into an electric form. Right? A microphone does it in one direction, a loudspeaker does it in the opposite direction. And they're very much similar in their design, and they operate on different principles. Some of them, I'll talk about some of the principles that they use. And one of the reasons we get excited about this kind of thing is because we can fool around with it and make it do all kinds of musical things. we have transducers all over the place in our daily lives that we don't necessarily think about that often. Very often we have these days we have tiny loudspeakers all over the place. Like we have them in our cell phones. We have these sort of ultra tiny microphones and loudspeakers in our cell phones now, or in those horrible Bluetooth headsets everybody wears with everything going here. But we also have them in like greeting cards, right? You have like the talking greeting card. Somehow there's a loudspeaker in there. How the hell does that work, right?
Yeah, those are awesome.
Right, and it's become sort of very commonplace to hide microphones all over the place too. Everybody has a sense that they're sort of being watched and heard all the time too. But there are also transducers in some sort of unusual places too that we don't necessarily think of, like things that read magnetic information. The card reader that we use every time we go to the automatic teller machine is sort of a kind of a transducer. It's taking magnetic information off of a card. And likewise, the device that plays a record listens to bumps in the surface of a vinyl disc and somehow turns that into sound. It's also a kind of a microphone that just reads surfaces, right? And we have transducers all over the place in our musical instruments anytime we amplify them especially. We have, I know that at least several of you people play instruments, and probably instruments that are amplified occasionally. Not anymore, but when you were a kid.
Yeah.
So you have these sort of different kinds of pickups on your guitars, especially on guitars and stringed instruments. We use a lot of kinds of pickups, and we'll talk a little bit about those too. So do you guys have a sense of sort of what sound is, or maybe it's good to have a sort of working definition of what is and isn't sound, because there are no real very sharp definitions of what is and isn't sound, but what is your sense of what sound is or isn't?
It's like a contraction and repression of the medium that is air.
Yeah, we do hear through air, and somehow but it's also a matter of speed, right? Right, we're somehow changing the local air pressure in a kind of rapid way. So we're setting up a vibration in the air, a way of changing the speed of the movement of the air. But that's to say that we're changing the speed of the movement of the air locally, right? It's not over a great distance. When we're moving pieces of air from here and moving them onto the other side of the room, that's a whole different story, right? That's what we call wind, right? There's a sort of balmy breeze, but we don't really experience that as sound so much. But what is sound is when we have sort of localized changes in the air pressure that set up a vibratory effect in the molecules that make up the air, the sort of particles of the air. And that works not just in air, right, but in all kinds of other media as well. Right? We can hear through solid surfaces, can't we? We can hear underwater. You stick your ear up against the wall to listen to your neighbors. Works especially well if you push your ear really hard up against the wall, or you listen to telephone poles or trees creaking and stuff like that. Likewise, you can hear underwater reasonably well, right? So you hear not just through gaseous media, but also through solid and liquid media too. But what about the borders of what we hear and can't hear, right? Can we hear every kind of a vibration?
No.
So what are the limits of it? Because it's important to...
for hearing. So it's like we can't hear every vibration because the ear can't pick up below, 20 hertz.
So what's, hertz is what?
That's the frequency.
Right, it's sort of the rate of repetition of the vibration, right? If a vibration is regular, and a lot of vibrations aren't very regular, but if a vibration is regular, we say that if it repeats a certain number of times every second, that we call that how many cycles it does per second, or the sort of fancy word is hertz, which is named after an electrical scientist from the 1800s.